for joining AmeriCollect on our webinar today on medical identity theft. My name is Sean Gretz. I'm the Vice President of Sales for AmeriCollect. Before we begin, there's a few housekeeping items. On the right-hand side of your panel, you'll find two different items that I want you to make you aware of. Those two items are, if you do have a question for Kenlon, and if there's time remaining, I'll ask those questions of Kenlon. If you do, on the right-hand side, just type it into the question section of the webinar panel, and that question then will be relayed to Kenlon at the end of the presentation if time is available. Also on the right-hand side, there is a handout section that is available as well. If you do not have the handouts, you can gather the handouts there on the right-hand side and click on it and download it. Like I said, Kenlon T. Gretz is the President and CEO of AmeriCollect. He's the creator of Ridiculously Nice Collections Dialogue, and he will be presenting today on medical identity theft. Welcome, Kenlon.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. I'm happy to be here. Happy February 9th to all of you. I'm excited about being this. The medical identity theft is not a topic that we touch on all too often, but more and more we're seeing an increase in the topic in the national media about medical identity theft. And so we thought we'd share what we do and what other providers throughout the United States do. So happy to be here. It's an exciting time here. I've got to tell you a little bit about this Ridiculously Nice for 50 years. As I was building the PowerPoint presentation, I have a coworker of mine. She's in charge of our branding here. Her name is Kathleen. I just wrote a note that I wanted 50 years. And so when she was done with the webinar, I saw our logo. Well, we were 50 years in business back in 2014. What I meant to say was this year, on Saturday, I'm celebrating 50 years of age. So I'm turning 50 years old, and she threw in been ridiculously nice for 50 years. I guess maybe I've been ridiculously nice for 50 years. But so I'm celebrating a birthday on Saturday, February 13th. I'll be expecting many, many birthday cards. So that's who I am. We appreciate you joining us. The information that we're sharing today is not legal advice. Get your own attorney for that. Medical identity theft. The Poneman Institute has a report that it's the 5th year doing it. The report is published in February of 2015. I'm sure there'll be a new one coming out this year. The 5th annual study of medical identity theft. And I'll tell you, it is a detailed report. It's consistent. It's a report that you can look at and benchmark. 21% increase from 2014 to 2015 that identity is stolen or shared on purpose. Now, the report and many of the other articles that I talked about or read about as I'm researching medical identity theft, I'm amazed how often identities are shared on purpose. Maybe you as providers aren't, but I certainly am. As I started reading about it and getting the statistics that were necessary, but what is medical identity? A medical identity theft occurs when someone else uses an individual's name and personal identity to fraudulently receive medical services, prescription drugs, and or goods. The prescription drugs, they don't have a real solid statistic on that, but prescription drugs are probably the #1 reason why medical identity theft exists. An organization called Medical Identity Fraud Alliance, you can Google them, is an alliance that does a great job addressing the issue in the medical community. It's an organization that you can choose to join. They receive some funding from the federal government, but most of it's from medical providers deciding to join that alliance. But that's really what it's about, someone using an individual's name and personal identity to receive medical services, the prescription drugs, or goods. Who's doing it? This statistic kind of shocked me. I thought I knew this, but I didn't know it was this high. 49% are family members or friends that are stealing their medical identity. 25% knowingly permitted their friends or family members to use their identity. Now, we're not talking about a junior-senior thing here. We're talking about, the kind of things that happens when, your sister's 21 years old and she's got her driver's license and she's handing down her fake ID to her, 19-year-old sister. Those kinds of things go on, but 25% knowingly permitted their family or family members to use their identity. 24% had a friend or family member use their identity without their permission. Ultimately, and you think about how easy that would be to go into someone's purse or their wallet, take a look at their, I mean, you know their date of birth. You probably fairly easily could get their social security number, their medical information, their insurance card, whatever you have, probably fairly easy to get to. And you know a lot about them. You know what ails them. You know maybe even what kind of medication. It's as simple as walking into the bathroom and seeing what kind of medications. So it's really easy to do, but probably fairly hard to protect that information. 51%, then the opposite, it has no relation or relationship. So we've got that big deciding factor when you as healthcare providers look at, when you look at how do you prevent this. I think it's really important to know that from a statistical standpoint, that family members and friends are often the ones who are stealing these identities. What's really interesting, and during the survey, the Poneman survey, who do the victims blame? 52% place that blame or the responsibility on the healthcare provider. It's your responsibility in their minds to protect them. It's not their responsibility to protect their identity. It's your responsibility. And that's really difficult to do. If someone comes in making an appointment and they present themselves as a new patient, and they look, they have all the credentials, everything that they need. 48% say that they would change providers because of identity theft. And I want you to think about that. So if someone's a victim, this report estimates that there's about 2.3 million victims of identity theft. And that's a big number. It's not nearly the number of cases that are reported. It's the survey questions were asked in such a way as, do you believe you may have been a victim of identity theft? So it's a little inflated, but that's a lot of victims of identity theft. And 48% that say they would change providers because of it. I think it's important that providers and the vendors that they choose have programs in place to help assist people who do have identity theft, to make it easy for them to figure out who wronged them and to get a resolution of it. We had a recent story, this happened last year. A radiology provider listed an account for collection at our office. So like anything else, we send a letter out to that consumer. The consumer called AmeriCollect, and they told us that they had identity theft. And this person was very convincing. They had a detailed story about how someone stole their identity at a hospital. The consumer sent us a police report. And it's just sort of the normal kind of thing that we would have them do, just to validate that their story has some meat into it. And so we validated that the police report. I think that person also sent an affidavit saying that this was not theirs. And then we sent it off to our radiology client. The radiology client then confirmed with the hospital that the identity theft is true. It was a fairly large investigation. AmeriCollect, we then canceled the account and we sent an apology letter. None of this happened so quickly, it never went on the consumer's credit file. 60 days later, the victim decides that they're going to sue AmeriCollect. And ultimately, we ended up settling the case for $2,500, and we paid about $4,000 in attorney fees to our own attorney. We tried battling it first, saying, hey, listen, how are we supposed to know? It's not our fault. Obviously, in this situation, the hospital never communicated downstream to the radiology provider that there was an identity theft that happened. And so it's really not the radiologist's fault either. Ultimately, it comes down to the hospital once they found out about the ID theft. Now, in this situation here, we looked at the healthcare provider, and there's a victim here. There's no doubt, and this victim wanted to make somebody pay for something bad that happened to them, and we were at somebody, and I guess that's part of the business that we're in. It sounds like collection agencies are loved, but it made me start thinking about what are we doing proactively to make it easy for consumers to report identity theft to us. And how do you handle that, So one of the things that we really want our clients to take away is that if there's a hint of ID theft, even if in passing they say, make sure you let your vendors know, your ancillary medical providers, the labs, the pathology, whoever that might be, maybe even insurance companies, if there's a hint of identity theft, just to put the brakes on a little bit so that we can go slowly. that we can double check things. I think that's important, that your staff, we tend to put people through the hoops of, I need an affidavit, I need a police report. And maybe with the proliferation of identity theft, especially in the medical industry, we need to put our brakes on just a little bit more quickly when we hear that there might be a medical identity theft. How do consumers become aware of ID theft? 33% get a billing statement from the provider, look at the charges and say, I was never there. I don't owe the balance remaining. 33%, that's how they find out. 24% from collection letters, and 14% from adverse credit file listings. So remember that 25% of these consumers gave permission. So those 25% already know. The rest of the people, they do it by stumbling across a statement. So I think it's really important that your customer service department, those that handle inbound phone calls regarding your billing statements, are aware of specific questions that they might ask to validate a claim of identity theft. I think that that's really important for your staff to remember. And since 24% and 14% involve your collection agency, maybe you want to reach out to your collection agency and ask for their policy or procedures on medical identity theft. What do you do when someone calls up and says, hey, I think my identity was stolen? What's the first reaction? How do those calls go, and what do they sound like? That's really, really important. When I think about how we get notified as a collection agency, there's three ways. And so sometimes it's a phone call, sometimes it's a formal dispute letter, and sometimes it's a dispute through what's called the eOscar system, which is a formal way to dispute your credit file. Now, you have to kind of think about what we do for a living as a collection agency. When we get an outbound phone call, oftentimes we're told little white lies, like the check's in the mail. I've been doing this since 1988, and I've heard that more than once, the check's in the mail. But what we hear over the phone is, I was never at that hospital, or I was never at the hospital on that date, or I never even heard of that doctor. And if you've ever handled any frontline phone calls, you're probably used to hearing those kinds of things, because maybe the person on the phone is telling a little white lie to give them a little bit more time, a stall maybe, so that it delays the amount of time that a payment is requested. And that's difficult. That's a skill a collector has that it takes time to figure that out. That's what we hear. So the verbal ones are interesting. And so the things that a person has to think about is, was this an inbound phone call or an outbound phone call? Did we catch that consumer off guard and they told us a little white lie? I look at it as, if we send a letter out to the consumer, they said 24% of them find out because of a collection letter. And you open up that collection letter and you were never at that hospital or never received those charges, you're going to pick up that phone immediately, and it's going to be an inbound phone call. So an inbound phone call, when somebody's telling you, I have identity theft, is probably going to mean more than an outbound phone call when they say, by the way, that was medical identity theft. And I'm exaggerating a little bit there, but so that's something that your staff needs to be trained with to recognize. Is it an inbound call or an outbound phone call? And then I ask myself, are the statements going to the correct address? Oftentimes people that have medical identity theft, what they do is they steal your identity, then go online and change your address from one address to a different address so that you don't get the bills right away. And it may take you 2 or 3 months to realize that your mail is being forwarded to a different address. Now, especially when you're having credit card identity theft and they're trying to use your credit card, they'll immediately do that. They'll forward your mail to a different address, and you might not realize that you're not getting mail for a month or two, or maybe a month or two. It may seem odd to you. So that's how we do it. So one of the things that we'll look at is we'll find out when we send a collection letter out, did we send that letter to 123 South Main Street, and then was there an address correction that forwarded it to 567 Maple Street? If it did, And the patient then, we reach out and we make an outbound phone call, and the patient says, I don't know anything about this. Well, it could be that that patient doesn't even live on Maple Street, but that his mail is being forwarded there. That's a good indicator that it's a possible real medical identity theft. If the address that we have on our system, the patient doesn't even live there, that's a real good sign. Another thing that you have to look at is when you hear those objections, the objections of, I was never at that hospital on that date, or I never heard of that doctor, you got to kind of look at the patient. As I think about just a family in general, you know, I might be the guarantor listed on the account, but my wife might be the bill payer or the care coordinator in the family. I mean, I've got 5 daughters. I don't always know when they're going in for this appointment or that appointment, or maybe what doctor they're seeing. Maybe, you know, there's a skin specialist because they're teenage daughters, you know. So you don't always know. So you're not always sure. So who's the patient? Is there a divorce involved? Did the mother to the child take them into for a treatment, and the bill's going to the father for whatever reason, and the father's like, I was never there. You need to dig a little bit deeper. It says, oh, it looks like the patient was possibly your daughter, Alyssa, that kind of a thing. Was it a different doctor that provided the services? We represent a lot of radiology practices, and we hear this all the time. I've never seen that doctor or heard of that doctor. Yes, we know you've never seen the doctor. So for us, it's a little bit of education, saying, oh, yes, this is when you were at the hospital so-and-so. You must have had some x-rays or some sort of services that were provided. Here's the date of service. And these collectors are very good about steering the consumer away from, I never heard of that doctor. Are you a brand new patient? You have to say to yourself, you know, if I was going to steal someone's medical identity, I think it'd be a heck of a lot easier becoming a brand new patient somewhere than being asked questions that are inconsistent with what someone had said at the last patient visit. So the people that steal medical identity theft are going to try to go to different locations than you would go to. So your frontline staff has to be thinking about, is this a brand new patient or is this a recurring patient with a long, long history of coming to our organization? But again, 49% of them know their victims when they're stealing their identity, so they might know some of those things. And how upset is the victim on the phone? Our staff, you know, you can tell the difference when someone's really upset about first having knowledge of becoming a victim of identity theft. They're upset. The tone is different. One of the things that we do is we've been working on is training our staff to listen to calls that have true identity theft on them versus a possible someone telling a little bit of a white lie. And then I look at, and our staff is trained to look at, did they ever make promises on the account before? Is this now something that they're selling? So it's difficult. Is it a true caller or true identity theft, or is it a stall for, in our case, the inability to make a payment, and should we just offer lower payment arrangements to get the call going? It's difficult. It's a skill set that you've got to figure out. Now, there's a lot of different things that we're required to do that you as a creditor, a medical provider, are not. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about in a little bit is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. If the account is on their credit file, there are certain things when we learn of medical identity theft that we have to do. But one of the things that we do is we have a form letter that we send out, and this is just a sample of one that we ask them, you know, that we send them a letter that they're claiming that their personal information was used fraudulently. We've noted their account is disputed, but we allow them to sort of back out of the white lie. If this is no longer the case, please call, and then we give them a number. Otherwise, we need additional information on how to process your claim of fraud. And for this, what this really means is once someone thinks that it's a medical identity theft, we have no way to know whether or not that's true or not. All we can do is gather the information. Only you, the medical provider, would be able to somehow determine whether it's true or not, because, of course, the patient's date of birth and Social Security number are going to match because it was stolen. So we don't really have any good way of doing that. But we give the consumer some tools. We guide them on where to go. This is a form that we send them, that we ask them to provide as much as possible. information that kind of helps us out. We might be able to compare signatures, those kinds of things. An affidavit and an identity theft police report is probably the two major things that we ask them to do. As I mentioned, because we're reporting the credit file in most of our clients' cases, we have to conduct a reasonable investigation with respect to the dispute. And that first thing that we do is ask the consumer for at least a statement, if not a police report, if not an affidavit, of what happened to them to the best of their knowledge. We have to review all the information provided by the consumer with the notice of dispute. We then have to mark the account as disputed on the credit file. And so the third step is completing the investigation, which means we're sometimes going to reach out to you and say, what do you think? Do you believe that this is medical identity theft? And we have to do this within 30 days with a respond. And so we're asking you as clients to help us out with those 30 days. We have this time frame that we have to do. If the investigation determines that the dispute item information is inaccurate, okay, the agency must correct the inaccuracy with each credit bureau and to which the information has been provided. So if we find out that this person truly is a victim of identity theft, we have to remove it from the credit file. Ultimately, that's what we figure out in most of the cases. But the weird part about this is that we find that most of the time when we send that request for a copy of a police report or an affidavit, they don't get returned. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But on a monthly basis, the credit file disputes that we get through the eOscar system, it's a portal basically, an online portal, that if a consumer wants to dispute their credit file, they click a couple of buttons, answer some questions, and they dispute it. We get those into our office every day they come in. On an average month, just general credit file disputes, we get about 6,200 credit file disputes a month. Now that seems like a lot, but we have to understand that we've got about 7 million accounts on our system that are placed on consumers' credit file. So that's about 0.089 disputes. Now some of them are legitimate disputes. Some of them are, I'm disputing this because I hope that the collection agency won't respond to the dispute, and then automatically it gets removed from the credit file. We have 30 days to respond to the dispute, and our average response time is 2 days. And we do that on purpose. We have about 4 team members working that. We don't want consumers that have inaccurate information on their credit file to be inaccurate for a very long time. So our average response time is 2 days for any of these disputes, which is amazing. Our staff does a great job with that. But ultimately, it's great customer service. If a consumer has a dispute, I want to get to it. I want to get it fixed. Now, we do have some that take deeper investigation. That takes us close to 30 days. But on average, 2 days. We're pretty good about it. So in an average month, about 267 of those disputes are claims of identity theft. And that's about 5% of that 6,200. So there's a good chunk of them that are ID theft. Now, about 74 of them, they actually provide us with backup document at the time of the dispute, where they've actually uploaded an image of a police report or an affidavit. So you can see that about a quarter of these, they provide backup images. We sometimes validate whether or not the police report is authentic. I'll get into that in a little bit. But so we're seeing an increase in this. About 2 years ago, we weren't even seeing ID theft was 1% of the credit file disputes. We've seen it increase. Now, is that because it's a tool that consumers might be using to improve their credit score, and in hopes that the collection agency just cancels the account ID theft just because they claim it, or are they thoroughly doing an investigation? And our staff does a pretty good job investigating to see whether or not it is a actual true identity theft claim. Again, we're seeing a great number of people will send that request out. We're lucky if we get 10% we send out. So we'll send out about anywhere between 200 to 400 of those letters a month that people that are claiming identity theft. Our next step is to ask for information, and we're seeing maybe about 10% of those coming back. We ask they file a police report and send us a copy as part of the investigation. When we receive that copy, we forward it on to a medical provider for them to investigate. Many times the consumer doesn't follow through with a police report or affidavit. And the reason they don't is oftentimes as they're filling it out, they put two and two together and realize it was their brother or their sister, and they don't want to go that far. And now that's sad, but that's ultimately their choice. So our investigation stops if they don't send us a completed police report and affidavit. Again, going back to that statistic, 49%. Some police departments, and I can't speak for all of them, but there's a feeling out there that the police departments look at identity theft as a nickel and dime kind of a crime. And that's not true when you look at the expense of it, what it costs medical providers, because you're not going to collect that money for the most part, or what it costs insurance companies for paying claims that they shouldn't be. But some police departments have made it so easy for consumers to submit a police report for medical identity theft or any type of identity theft that you can fill it out online, save it, attach it, and upload it. And you filed the police report. Now, I don't know what police departments do with them then. Do they do a thorough investigation, bring the consumer in? So all I'm saying is that there's a big difference between a filled out but not filed police report or one that actually has some investigation to it. So you may look at the type of procedure that was, how much money is involved, basically is what I'm trying to say. And you say, you know what, maybe we need to call the police department and see what kind of investigation they've done on this. Now, of course, you need to speak to your HIPAA compliance department on that issue. We do not follow up with the police departments. If it's filled out for us, it's filled out, and we forward it on to our clients. So who reports to the police? Only about 40% report it to law enforcement. So the other 60% just sit on it. That's probably the 49% that they know it's their brother or their sister, and another 10% that just, you know what, it's no skin off my back. They use my insurance, it's the insurance company. 55% say they didn't report it because they didn't think law enforcement would be helpful. And then that's something that maybe you, as medical providers in your communities, having a grassroots kind of connection with the police department, start that dialogue. Have a conversation with the police department and say, what can we do to be more helpful to you, to help you realize that this is a crime that costs all of us a lot of money. 47% state that they didn't report the theft because it was a family member. That's why they're not reporting it to the police department. And I think that is important, that we continue those kinds of communications with patients and say, listen, if you don't report it, you know, they're not the only one that can report medical identity theft. You could report it too. So you might want to think about a policy in your own organization that says, we were made aware of an identity theft, and yes, the patient didn't fill, or the victim didn't fill out an affidavit or a police report. That's not to say that you don't have a right to fill out a police report yourself. Something to consider. All I can tell you is that we've done our research on medical identity theft, and we feel that we could improve too. We feel that maybe we need to reach out more consistently to consumers. Maybe we're making it a little bit too clunky for them, asking for too much, that we get more people to help us figure out and decrease this unnecessary expense that we have. So, you know, there's some tools here that I have. The FTC has a great affidavit on their website. What's nice about this, it's not your identity theft complaint. They say that the average time completed is 10 minutes. It asks all of the information that's necessary for a police department to do an investigation. Something that you might want to think about linking to your website. Again, a great tool to use, a sample affidavit that could get the ball rolling. Other things that you can do is there's tools to help victims with identity theft. FTC is a toll-free. This is a wonderful website, identitytheft.gov. Identitytheft.gov is, it's coming here. Excuse me. Should have had it open before this. a fairly easy way to get started. It's whether it's an identity theft, you can choose whether it's a medical account or credit card. So it's underneath here, all of the types. They ask all the right questions. Those are the kinds of things that you want to do. That people can walk through themselves. Your staff can offer it. Our staff lets people know that they can go to identitytheft.gov to walk them through the report, and actually it fills it out for them, and then they can choose to submit it to whatever necessary. Simple solutions to reduce the occurrence of medical identity theft. You know, when I think about this, my bank that I go to, and I don't go to the bank all that often anymore, but they asked to see, probably about 5 years ago, a photo ID every time I do a transaction. Now I don't even think about it. I open up my wallet and I lay it on the desk where the teller is, and I just hand it to them. And I don't always go to the same bank. They have many locations where I go. So think of the banking industry. They've instituted a photo ID, you know, and I'm sure some of your healthcare providers have. That would solve so much if all you had to do is present a photo ID. Some organizations have EHRs that have a patient photo imaged in. Boy, that helps a decent amount. Thinking about that, of course, that's going to cost a lot more money. And people don't always like getting their photo getting taken. I get that. But the photo ID on patient access, well, that's the way to do it. And then other things you might want to think about implementing is just security questions. If you've ever had to access your credit file through annualcreditreport.com or other things, they ask should-know questions. Questions I hate, but they ask. You had a car loan in 2011 with Bank of America. How much was your car loan payment? That car was like 6 years ago. I have no clue what the payment was anymore. Or for your privacy purposes, can you tell me which of the doctors you've seen in the last 6 months? You know, so there's things that you can think about, should know questions that patient access people could ask if maybe they're suspicious or if they weren't sure that the person that's presenting themselves. So I know we're almost out of time. We've tried to decrease the length of these for certain ones. We said this one will be about a half an hour, so we're not going to have any time for questions. But if you submitted questions, we'll respond to them either today or tomorrow sometime. The resources, Medifraud.org is the Medical Identity Fraud Alliance organization. ACA International, got some information from them, and TC. So these are some of the resources that we use in building this webinar. We hope that you have a great week and enjoy Valentine's Day, and I'll be looking for the birthday cards. Our next webinar is about denial codes. We have a small percentage of our clients that give us denial codes when they give us the placement file. But what they do is they help us solve the puzzle more quickly. So how can a collection agency collect more money if you send us denial codes at the time of listing? That's going to be Tuesday, April 5th from 1 to 1:45. A super helpful tool, and we can help that patient resolve the bill more quickly with their insurance and generate more revenue back to you. If you'd like to register, you can register at that hyperlink there, or you can go to email us at sales@americollect.com. I want to thank you. We are a 7-time winner of the Inc. 5000 fastest privately growing companies, and a 7-time winner of Inside Arm Best Places to Work in Collections. We're a ridiculously nice collection agency trying to change how collection agencies are viewed by being ridiculously nice on every single phone call. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great Valentine's Day.